Welcome to Infertility And Me Podcast, a show that amplifies diverse stories about the struggles of infertility and fertility in a safe space. Our goal is to normalize fertility stories that validate, give hope, and create a community where no one is left silently suffering.
Welcome, you guys, to another episode of Infertility And Me Podcast. I am Monique Farouk, your fertility friend and a women's health advocate. If this is your first time being on the show, listening to the show, downloading the show, welcome, new friend. We appreciate you for being here. And today, I got a very special, super special guest, you guys, for you as we move into Christmas and getting through the holidays. And this being the last episode of the year, I have Mrs. Nicole Gomez Fisher from Good Egg Film. If you don't know about it, okay, you need to stop right now and whatever you're doing, unless you're driving, and go to Instagram and follow Good Egg Film on Instagram. Nicole and her team are doing amazing, fantastical work. Yes, I said fantastical. I made that up. And they are spreading awareness through film, through creativity, bringing lightheartedness to it with a little bit of drama, a little bit of toxicity. But we're going to get into all of that. So thank you, Nicole, so much for taking the time out of your day and being here with us and giving us some hope and positivity as we move into the new year. It just seems like yesterday was January 2022. It's so crazy, right?
Sure does.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm glad we were able to do it before the new year is out. Oh my gosh, you guys are doing so many great things. But before we get into that, we want to ask Nicole, how did you get diagnosed with infertility? Did you have any struggles prior to diagnosis with medical conditions?
Yeah, it all started with a turkey sandwich. So I was having a turkey sandwich one day and thought I was having some abdominal pain, and got worse and worse. And I thought, oh, this is just really bad indigestion or gas. This is gonna be ridiculous. They're gonna laugh me out of the ER. And I went to the ER and didn't come out because apparently that gas was actually endometriosis. So what I thought was just some abdominal pain that could be cured with, a gas X ended up taking me into emergency surgery. And the endometriosis had taken over the entire lower half of my body. And of course, it clogged my fallopian tubes. It took over my right ovary and partial left. So right before they rolled me in, they said I have to sign off just in case they had to remove one ovary. And I woke up to find out that pretty much everything was removed. And it was jarring, to say the least, scary, to say the least, because I was only 19. And at that time, because we're talking a couple of years ago, not to date myself, the infertility world and everything, the freezing of eggs was very different than it was now. But I remember waking up and a couple of days later, the doctor approaching me saying, well, you might want to consider freezing your eggs. And at 19, I thought this is the most absurd thing in the world, but I did it because, who knew what the future was to hold? And it was really upsetting, to say the least, being so young and now knowing that I was going to have a future with lots of difficulty. And again, at that time, fertility and all the things we have now was not what we had then. And so we froze our eggs, and then so many years later, I finally got married, and we tried to use those eggs. And after, I think it was 3 attempts at, trying to fertilize, it was pretty obvious that they weren't viable anymore. And again, a lot of that had to do with the time frame and also the technology then. So it was shitty, to be honest.
So you had the ovaries and your fallopian tubes removed during that surgery when they went in there and saw the full scope of the endo?
I had the right ovary removed, both tubes, and partial left.
Wow.
So of course they left me with enough to still get my period.
Yeah. And then also have some of your own hormones still being produced, which is important when we get into middle age and being naturally induced with menopause. It's really important. Yeah, you don't have to be on
It was
synthetic
crazy
meds.
because at that age to be going through like what they called was a pre-menopause or whatever, what have you. You're going through the hot flashes, you're in college, people don't understand why you're so gross and sweaty at parties. And I was still trying to comprehend what was going on with my body. And, you know, being a teenager and being insecure and my boyfriend having just broken up with me over all this, which again had nothing to do with the future that we held. It was just too much for him to deal with. And physically I didn't want to be invaded, so to say, anymore, because
Yeah.
the surgery felt so invasive, and
Okay.
having such little control over the not the diagnosis but the end result was emotionally, you know, a really hard trip to go down, because, you know, again, being so young, being still in college, not really knowing how to explain it to my friends, and also emotionally, forget about just the physical, emotionally I was just distraught and I was angry, and it really came out in all my relationships, unfortunately. And even now, all these years later, having my two beautiful girls, there's, you know, there was resentment, you know, and we'll go down that road later, but when other people were getting pregnant, and I know you see it all over social media where people are like, I can't go to a baby shower, but it's true. And some people will say it's selfish, but, you know, unless you really understand the pain of what that means, there's nothing selfish, because they talk about self-care all the time now. And I thought at that time, although again, a while ago, that self-care was the most important thing, especially the emotional. You know, physical was already done, but the emotional part was really hard to cope with.
I'm sure. You were a teenager. Again, as you said, our brains are not even fully developed,
Yeah. I
you
couldn't even
know?
understand what that meant for my future, you know, and I have to tell you
Yeah.
that when I had one boyfriend I was with for a long time, and, you know, you don't know where it's going to go. And I always
Mhm.
felt like I would have to explain it to them before even we got serious, because I was so afraid of getting serious and then them saying, and then telling them and having that be the reason why they would leave me, because they wanted to have children, and already knowing that it was going to be a struggle might be off putting and what have you. But then when I
Yeah.
finally met my husband, it was like, I think on our first date, I was like, let me just lay it out here. Okay. If you want
Mm.
kids, you're SOL, dude. Like, you just might want to find somebody else. But if you're willing to stick on for the ride, it's going to be a big one. And it was. It was an
Mm.
8-year journey.
And what was his initial reaction to that?
You know, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I think he was
Yeah.
like smitten from the get go.
Aw.
And I remember him basically saying, like, thank you for letting me know. It
Mm.
might be a little premature that you just dumped it on me on the first date, but I get it, and I'm willing to stick with it. So let's just see where this goes. And he never strayed.
Mm.
So
Mm.
he's been a
Mm.
very loyal husband, and he understands how hard it was. But, you know, what's so weird, and we'll get to it later, was that, and again, I know the focus is infertility, but obviously the infertility led to the egg stuff situation. And I think the hardest thing was that for me at the end of the day, accepting that it genetically wasn't going to be my kids, accepting that I would have to adopt them once they were born. Just a lot of these steps that made me feel less connected to them, because we had to have a surrogate too. So I couldn't carry, which is something I didn't discover until I actually did get pregnant. And then I found out that there was no way I would have been able to make it to term. And at that point, I stopped everything. I said, I can't do this anymore. Like, physically, emotionally, financially, I am done, drained to the bone. And that's when I decided to do my first feature film, because I needed something to call my own. I needed something to like hang on to make me feel like I had my own voice, anything. And when that was all said and done, my husband's like, let's try again. And that's when we got the surrogate. She got our first, she would only do one egg because she didn't want to have multiples. And she was a pro surrogate because she had done it before. And she had 3 kids of her own. And she was really afraid that if she carried twins or more, that her lining, you know, wouldn't hold. And anyway, long story short, we we transferred one. It was the best, most viable embryo we had, and it didn't take. And when it didn't take, she was so devastated for us. But we all needed like a timeout, you know. So it was a holiday season going into Christmas, and we said, all right, let's all just step back. There was a lot of guilt, there was a lot of shame, there was a lot of pain. There was just so much on all of us, you know, even her husband, you know, it was a lot. And so right after Christmas, we said, you know, we would like to do it again if you're willing, but we do want to do more than one embryo. We have 3 left. Are you willing to do all 3? Because we couldn't, who could afford to do this again? You know? So she took a couple of weeks to think about it. I know she didn't want to do it, but it was like, how I didn't want to give her 2 out of the 3 that were remaining and then find out that that one that we didn't do was the one that would have stuck. So it ended up that she actually, all 3 stuck initially. Yeah. That was exactly my reaction because it was like, oh my God, be careful what you wish for. And, unfortunately one didn't stick. And so, but then we ended up with our twins. So
you guys have twin girls. Wow.
totally. And she also had a very difficult pregnancy with us. Very
Oh
difficult.
no. Wow.
Yeah. She actually tore, and so she had to have the éclage thing to sew her back up. And she was panicking and she was crying. And it's a weird bond that you have with another woman, but it's a bond that we still have. And I love having her in my life. The kids call her Auntie Ray Ray.
Okay, we're not going to cry today, okay, you guys? We're not going to do that today. We're not going to shed any tears.
It's more fun. I can give you more humor, I promise. No,
yes,
but she's a blessing on top of the girls,
And after the girls are born, did you struggle because of the trauma of your initial diagnosis and the emotional effects of all of that? Were you getting any help at any point from a therapist or counselor or anything?
No. It's funny because I wish I had, but again, and maybe this is just me being like, woe is me, I'm not much of a martyr, but when I look at what is provided on social media now, between what you're doing, what other people are doing, just the people who are very open and transparent about their journeys, and just having those vehicles and outlets to be able to like talk about it, I didn't have that. And when I tell you that it was so dark and so lonely, and all of my friends were getting it was like boom, 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 boom. It was endless for years. And it wasn't until one of my husband's friends was on her 4th pregnancy. And I said, I cannot go to the shower. I just can't. And he begged me and he didn't understand. And he's like, just come. And I'm like, please don't put me through this. And then of course, not understanding my position, he was like, you're being selfish. I ended up going. One person made one comment because I was really bloated from the hormones, from the shots. You get that little pregnant pooch. And again, she did not know, but she thought I was pregnant. She got very excited and she came running over to me. She's like, oh, did you tell anybody? And I'm like, tell them what? And I was already in a foul mood to begin with. And she said, that, and I go, no, thanks. This is just, hormones and fertility meds. And thanks for pointing out that I look bloated and fat. And then another woman that day was like she just came up to me and I guess she was like feeling my energy and she's just like rubbing my arm. She was like, it's going to be okay. And I just looked at her. I'm like, fuck away from me. Like, I don't even know. Sorry. I didn't like to edit that out, but I was like, why you don't, first of all, don't touch me. Second of all, like, I don't want your sympathy. Like nothing's happening here. I'm just going through the motions. But I feel for people who don't understand. It's no different than when like somebody passes away and you're trying to send your condolences and they don't quite understand what you're going through. So I feel for them as well. But
I understand completely though what you mean by that. And it's like times you want to be coddled and times you don't want to be coddled, and trying to find that balance between the two. And a lot of times, like you've experienced and I've experienced and all of you guys listening experience, is just a day by day, minute by minute thing sometimes, And
very much so.
I just hate that no more people aren't aware of this sort of an issue. And because of that, there's a lack of sympathy, there's a lack of empathy, and when people don't have understanding of something, ignorance comes in and rears its ugly head. And ignorance, not like mean things, but ignorance as in not knowing, that type of ignorance, and not knowing what to say and not knowing what not to say, or just shut the F up, altogether.
Just don't say anything.
And I think one thing that has made me, when dealing with women in public and coming into contact with people, like, I don't even bring up kids, honestly, at this point. And if she looks a little bloated and it looks like it could be like the lower belly starts coming out when you're pregnant, I don't even say anything. No, because you don't know if it's fibroids. You don't know what it is. You don't know.
Absolutely. Fibroids. God, you just think about all the different, there's so many different, I don't want to say levels, but ways to categorize infertility. It could be anything. Like you're asking me, my journey is different than with somebody else, and I've heard of so many women that I've talked to about their journeys. And it's fascinating when you hear, what certain people go through and what causes it. A lot of it being endometriosis and what have you, and never even understanding like how that came about and why. Supposedly, and I don't know if this is to be true, the reason my case was so bad, they said, was because I had had a couple of abdominal surgeries as a child, and so much of the scar tissue had wrapped around what was already inflamed below. So it just grew out to be bigger. So it wasn't necessarily endometriosis that was surrounding it. It was a combination of that and scar tissue. And so that scar tissue was actually the reason I couldn't carry to full term, because my stomach would not extend because of the tissue. I would have to go in and have surgery to remove that. And I was like, yeah, I've been through enough. I'm good.
Yeah, that makes total sense though with the scarring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not flexible. It's
Correct.
not flexible. Takes away the flexibility of the
Right. There was
uterus
no
and your
give.
organs.
It was so
Yeah,
tight.
makes sense. What point, I'll ask, did your creativity and your need for creation of the film begin? Was it after the girls were toddlers? How
Oh,
soon was it?
not even before they were born.
Wow.
I started writing this honestly like 10 years ago. It
Wow.
was one of those things where I just thought there was something fascinating about the journey I was going on, but it was never about the egg donor and myself. It was just about the what ifs. And then once I got to that point where what really happened, the whole story and how this really came to be was it was 2 days before my fifth transfer. And this time it was now with the donor egg and obviously my husband. So we had, at this point, we had a bunch of embryos still left. But now we were going to try me before we went to the surrogate. This is the first of 2 tries with this particular egg donor. And on the first try, my husband I had to go get the blood work, make sure my levels were ready, make sure my uterus was ready for the transfer. And my husband needed the car to go to Long Island for work, and I was in Brooklyn. So he's like, I'll drop you off at the doctor's appointment early. And with this particular clinic, you were not allowed to meet the person. You were not allowed to know them. This was all a code, a number, an application. So I knew nothing about her other than I was able, once you sign the contract, not before, were you allowed to see a picture of the donor. And that was only if the donor even gave them a picture. Some did not want them. Some would give them pictures of them when they were 4, 10, 27, whatever, just to see features. But you were not allowed to see it because they didn't want you to design a baby. So they said you have to go off the application. And then once you choose and select and everything's signed, you get to see a picture. So I saw her headshot. And she's like a front singer in a band. I got there early and I was just perusing through a magazine. And then all of a sudden she comes out and obviously I knew who she was. She's very distinct looking. And she came out, and Monique, the feelings that went through me at that moment were severe. It was jealousy. It was feeling like a failure, feeling like as a woman, like I had to rely on this person that I don't even know. I don't even know her name. I know nothing about her other than what's on that application. And she's the one that's going to procreate with my husband. Like, I know it sounds ridiculous and overdramatic, but it felt like I was being cheated on. It felt like I was being discarded. I hate to use the word broken because we use it too often in this particular, but it was everything. I felt, see, now I'm going to cry, and we said we were going to make you laugh, but I felt useless. I just felt like, and so I panicked. And obviously I had a bunch of hormones, and I called my husband and I'm like, oh my God, my baby mama is standing 5 feet away from me. What do I do? He's like, you sit your ass down and you don't move. That's what you do. And of course he hears me walking. He hears the door open or close, and he's like, get your ass back in that office. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, you'll get arrested for stalking. I'm like, don't you want to get to know her? Don't you want to know how she walks and what she looks? And he's like, I don't want to know anything. He never wanted to see the picture of her. He's like, I want to know nothing. Turn around. So I might have gone like a half a block before I realized that this is insanity. Like, what was I going to do? Stop her and be like, hi, my name's Nicole, and just wanted to meet the mother to my children. Like, it's just everything about it. It was crazy. So that was where the story in my head began. And the story was, what if I did follow her? What if she wasn't? What if she was nothing like she said on the application? What if she lit a cigarette when she said she didn't smoke? All these crazy thoughts. So I went back in, cried my eyes out to my husband. And he's like, look, there was nothing you could do. And I said, but I just wanted to hug her. I wanted to hold her hand. I wanted to scream at her. Like, there were so many different raging, unexplainable emotions that happened at that moment. And I thought, this is absurd. If I can't make this funny, because this is crazy. What can I do with all this? And I just started pouring it onto the page, like what I was feeling. And I have a tendency in general that when I write, and even when I used to do stand-up comedy, I try to put heart and humor together because you can't have one without the other. And, in life, humor is what gets us through. And for me, this was an outlet to sort of throw my emotions on the page. And really, it had so many different inceptions that what it ended up being was a lot more wacky and absurd than I had really expected. But the people, like I said, that saw it at the screening recently were just like, it was a relief, because the focus is not, I mean, yes, we open with the journey of infertility and we find out our lead character, Jessica, who's played by the wonderful Yara Martinez, is just so delicate and feels so desperate, and the husband and wife are on such different levels. And she even says to her husband, when her husband's like, why are you so against other options? There's other ways for us to get pregnant. Why would you not consider something like egg donation? And she says, the only way for me to explain it to you is by telling you it's like being an understudy in a hit Broadway show about your own life. That was the comparison, was like to watch somebody else play you because you're not good enough to play yourself.
Wow.
And so, it's not that deep, Monique. I'm trying to make you laugh.
No, I'm just trying to take it all in, and because I'm a visual person, so I'm visualizing everything that you're saying in my head. Like the point of seeing your egg donor, and you're like, I can see you like standing behind her, just watching her as she does her thing, like on some what's that show? You like on some You type shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the image I had, because that's how I would react too. I would just be sitting there like with my coffee and shit, sipping, just watching. And tiptoeing right behind it.
And she came out, by the way, let me just preface if you're visual, with a hoodie and big like Hollywood sunglasses. And
real
here's the
diva-ish.
best part. And so then she took her sunglasses off, and I was like, oh, because like she was trying to be, I mean, maybe she didn't know I was there, but I'm sure she didn't want anybody, because I'm sure I'm not the only one. It's a whole other story. Wow. How many siblings they might have. But yes, but my point is so the night that my husband and I went through stacks of applications, we decided to have a cocktail or two, because when we started joking, we're like, oh, we want her to be this and we want her to be that. And blah. So the girls are born, one's brunette and one is super blonde. And I'm like, huh? And I went back because I remember in her headshot, her hair was black, like really dark. And then I found her application. She's 5'11" and blonde. Like, I'm 5 feet and this is fake. So, I mean, my husband's, we're both, smaller. We're both dark, olive skin, dark hair. Yeah. And when all of a sudden this girl comes out blonde, I was like, Joe, what? Should we look at what? Because, by the way, the embryos were frozen in 2008.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So that's another thing. So we hadn't looked at her application in years. And so then when we went back to look at it, I was like, did you, what, 5'11" and what were we drinking that night? Like we were so about trying to get Hispanic or Italic, anything that matched our background.
Your original backgrounds, yeah.
Clearly went off the mark there.
Completely opposite. Yes.
Our girl was out in Denver because at the time it wasn't legal in New York for surrogacy.
That's right.
So our girl was in Denver, and she's, I don't know, she's just your right. She's amazing, but I'm saying she's like your average, white girl. Yeah. But I wasn't as concerned about the image of that person as I was about the health.
Exactly.
To make sure she was mentally and physically healthy and understood. Because I got to tell you, I mean, you carried your own, correct?
I did. Yeah, I did.
In this particular case, she really had not only a difficult pregnancy, but really bad postpartum. And it was very hard from my standpoint to sit there while the kids were in the incubators, because they were in NICU for a while. And she wanted to hold them. And of course she was pumping. And I was like, do I want them to drink her? Like, now it went from being this loving bond to almost the same feeling with the donor, where she's holding the babies and I'm thinking, oh my God, like they're not going to connect with me.
The milk. They're not going to,
everything. And when she was holding them and doing everything, a voice, exactly. And I'd say that they were about 10 months old when she flew from Denver to visit me because she wanted to see the kids. And as horrible as I feel saying this out loud, I did not want her to be here. I was so scared that those kids were going to feel her, hear her, sense her. and the connection was going to be more than I was, because I was really struggling with the connection. I was depressed, even though I wasn't going through postpartum myself per se. They say that even though you don't carry, you kind of go through it, because it's like, when you carry, I don't know, because I've never carried, but I assume that the connection is there, and you come home from the hospital and it's still that. I'm not saying everyone goes through postpartum, but with us, it was like, get out of the hospital, fly with your little babies home to New York, and then all of a sudden you're here and you've got this kids, and for me, there was no bond. It took a long time for me to say, I'm the mother. That's it. I'm the mother. But the one thing my surrogate lawyers didn't tell me was that I would have to go to court the next day after they were born to adopt them. And I didn't know that was part of the process. And it just made me feel even more separated. I remember being in crying and crying, and they were like, are you okay? And I was like, no one told me that they weren't just mine. I just assumed they would come out and just be mine. I didn't know there was one more step on top of all the financial burden, on top of everything my husband and I had been through, together, as far as the emotional ups and downs of caring and losing. And, I don't think anybody quite understands.
There's so many different layers to infertility and fertility struggles, and how it happens for everyone, or if it's because I'm a lesbian woman and I haven't found a mate yet, or I'm a gay man and I want to be a single father. It's just so many layers to modern day family building, because we're not as traditional as we used to be. And I don't think that cinematography should be any different. Like, we got to evolve, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a market for everything. I truly believe there's a market for everything. And what I don't know what your journey was, or if you agree with me, but in my particular case, one of the hard things in that moment when I bumped into my donor wasn't just the whole journey of infertility, but on my mom's side of the family, being Latin, it was really taboo. And it was something that my mom did not want me to share with people. She hated when I would bring it up, because I'm a very open person, and it bothered her. She's like, you have no filter. You have to be careful what you say to people. And this is the woman had more sass than anybody I know,
in the family,
who
right?
never even knew
Always
what a filter was. Yeah. And she would, whenever my aunts were around or what have you, she'd be like, Mira, don't say nothing. And I was like, I'm not going to say anything. And she's like, and I'm like, well, you embarrassed? And that's what bothered me, was I thought she was embarrassed that, that I was shamed, like it was shameful to her. And she came from a very religious home too, where a lot of them were like, you are going against God's will. What are you doing? My titi said to me, God's rejection is his protection. And I was livid after I heard that, because I thought, what is he protecting me from? Like, what did I do? And it was like on top of the guilt, on top of the pain. And then to have the family really like, don't want me to talk about it, it made me feel even smaller, because I felt I can't even have the support because you're ashamed or you're embarrassed. Like, what's wrong with what I'm doing? And they thought that, forget about the egg donation, forget about the surrogate. Oh my God, everything I did was going against what they thought was right and wrong. And we actually, the other day I saw on somebody else's Instagram feed that someone said that they're called DCPs, donor conception people.
That it's so crazy that that's even a thing, right?
It's insane. I mean, really, what we have come through, but the woman had said something that by doing that, by having a donor, child, that it was going against not only biological rules or whatever it is, but that it was unfair to the child, because you were taking them away from their biological parent. And I said, well, what is the difference between that and adoption? It's the same thing.
Exactly.
And he said, well, with adoption, the mother is willingly giving up their child. And I said, well, with donor, the woman is willingly giving up her egg. It's the same thing. And it went to the back and forth, and I just stopped, because I'm so passive aggressive. I'm like,
the ignorance. The ignorance of uneducation, like no education, no knowledge about things outside of the traditional ways of procreation. And unfortunately, and knocking on wood, until that generation kind of dies off more, this is what we have to deal with.
Yeah.
Especially in terms of what you were saying about your family being super religious, like many Latin families or Latinx families all over the world. And so just like in the South, like it's crazy. Some of the ideologies that people have surrounding procreation and the modern ways of doing so, and some of the political figures that we hear since the Roe v. Wade, in their ignorance, specifically a lot of men, but the women, we can't leave them out either, because some of them are just as ignorant as the men. And it just really baffles me that people have lost their critical thinking skills in
Absolutely.
lieu of religious belief. Now, church and state was supposed to be separate too, right?
Exactly. And I believe that's always been the case. I think because of social media, it's just more prominent. I feel like
Boom. That's it.
that's what I
Yeah.
think. I think
Yeah.
it's always been there. I think it's always been an
Yeah.
issue. And the Roe versus Wade thing is so, it's horrible to begin with, but it's even scarier with the fertility and infertility world right now, because the reproductive, I don't know where we're going to end up, but boy, it's going to take away a lot from a lot of people, and for no other reason than just to drive a wedge into society. I think at the end of the day, there's certain subjects in life that people should just mind their business and let
Yeah.
other people just
Yeah.
live and let live,
Which is why I think it's so incredible that you completed the project,
I
because
am
it has
too.
the ability to reach millions of people.
I do hope that's
Millions
what
of
happens
people.
with it, because it really, I was trying to explain to somebody who was like, oh, but it really wasn't about the infertility, and it was just kind of mentioned in the beginning, and I said, because it really was, it's about infertility, it's about the journey for egg
Mm-hmm.
donation, but to me it was more about how lost one can get in the process, where you literally almost forget what the goal is, because it's
Yeah.
just the shots, the medicines, the hormone, like it's almost like you're just on a gerbil thing, and you're just
Mm-hmm.
going, and every day is
Mm-hmm.
the same
On that
thing, and
wheel just
the
spinning.
wheel just spinning and just hoping for something to happen. And when the couple in my movie are having their first disagreement about the situation, where the husband's sort of desperate, saying, there's other ways for us to do this, and she's completely against it,
Yeah.
he says to her, I feel like we're just living life, but we're not moving. We're just standing still, and everything else is happening around us, because everybody else's life is moving forward and we're just stuck. And
Mm-hmm.
it made her, in the story, you could tell that she feels guilty, like it's her fault that his life is not progressing, that the fact that they don't have a family, the guilt and the blame was on her shoulders, even if it wasn't. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
another
Mm-hmm.
thing, that when people come at you and say that you're going against God's will, or you're doing this wrong, or fighting you on social media with your just with what you're saying, there's just such a lack, like you said, it goes back to ignorance. There's a lack of understanding of what each individual goes through. Yes, it was about infertility. Yes, it was about egg donor, but it really was about this couple that was so absorbed in this journey that they literally forgot what it was like just to be together and to have
Yeah.
fun and to live life. And so when this zany journey takes them into Atlantic City, and they're running from these bad guys, whatever, you start to realize that this whole thing was just absurd to begin with. And the
Yeah.
couple has a really beautiful last moment where she's like apologizing to him, and he was like, no, I get it, you don't need to apologize. And then at the end, he's like, this has been the best ride of our lives, like we forgot to
Mm-hmm.
live. And
Yeah.
that was very much the truth in my world with the journey of infertility, always feeling like my husband didn't quite understand me, that we were not on the same page, were we even meant to be together, because this is, he said he was okay on that first date, but now, all these years later, he's like, what was I thinking? And I would honestly feel really guilty a lot of times, and always apologize to him. I don't know if you ever apologized to your husband, but I just felt
Oh,
like
all
it
the
was
time.
always
Yeah.
my fault. So
All the time.
yeah.
All the time. From the very beginning of us dating, that family was very important to him,
Mm,
especially since he doesn't have any here
mm-hmm.
in the States. And so I get it.
Yeah.
A lot of fighting, a lot of unnecessary arguments, and a lot of self pity,
Mm.
and dealing with, and then also the men dealing with the fact that they can't fix it.
Oh, did you just
Like,
nail it on
and
the head? Oh my
yeah,
God. We would fight
yeah.
so often. And then finally one night, I just said, you know what? Let's just end this. Find yourself somebody who's fertile. Like, let's just move on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not happy. This is too much for any one couple to handle. And I remember him broke down, and he said, I just feel helpless. I don't know how to
Mm-hmm.
make this okay. I don't know how to,
Yeah.
sit there and give you your progesterone shots in your butt and not cry. And it was a really tough thing, because I actually never thought about his feelings, to be honest, because it was so much
Yeah.
about me and what I was going through, that I didn't think that maybe he was struggling with feeling helpless, and, like you said, not being able to man up, so to say.
Yeah. They
And
like to fix stuff.
yeah, and also from your story, and talking to a couple other women recently, just how many of us have come so close to divorce because of it. And then you have
Mm-hmm.
the kids, and then you fight about that.
It's always something. Again, I'm just so appreciative of you and the project that you've created, I
Thank
can't
you.
wait to see it. I may have to come up to New York or something to come see it or something. I don't know. Make the
Well, let's
drive.
hope. Well,
Yes.
we're working with distributors now, so my hope is
Mm-hmm.
that the next couple of weeks we have a deal coming through, and if that's the case, then it
Wonderful.
will be released next year. But
Wonderful.
I would love for you to see it. I really thank you so much. I don't even know if we even hit the topics you wanted to talk about.
The
But,
topics they
but we hit
they
the
decide
topic.
for themselves.
Yeah,
That's what I love
exactly.
about
Whatever comes out of the
podcasting. The
conversation.
story comes out on its own. If there's anything that you would say to infertility standing face to face, what would that be at this point in your life?
At this moment, what would I say to it? Am I allowed to say what I would say?
You can say whatever you like.
Go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. I would say, you're unfair. You're mean.
Yeah.
I would want to punch it in the face.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think there's a reason for everything in life. At least I tell myself that. And I feel like sometimes it's easier, and I don't want to say safer, but easier to not question things and why things are the way they just are. And it's really more about your attitude and what you do with the pain, what you do with the heartache. And in my case, it took a long time to embrace who I was as a woman and to accept that and be okay with the fact that maybe I was a little broken, but it's okay. We all have a little crack somewhere, right?
Thank you for that reminder of that some things just happen, and sometimes life is just goddamn unfair, and we
Yeah.
have to take it the way we can and get through it the best we can. So, Nicole, my dear, where can we find you online? Good Egg Film, your website and all too.
Yeah, so on Instagram, it's Good Egg Film. And then website is goodeggfilm.com. And the same thing on Facebook. It's all the same. And like I said, my hope is that we'll have it released next year, and that people like you and myself who have gone through a tumultuous journey can actually sit back and cry and laugh at the
Yes,
absurdity of life.
I'm telling you. And it sometimes it doesn't stop there. There's more
It
that
sure
life
doesn't.
wants to throw at you, right? But yeah, thank you so much again, Nicole. I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
talking with us, sharing your heart and your truths, and how you became the writer director that you are today.
Yeah.
And
And
I
the
know our
mama.
friends will appreciate you and the work that you're doing as well. So you guys know where to find me on Instagram.
Thank you.
Infertility and Me Podcast, guys. And we'll talk in the new year. Peace and blessings.